Hey folks, David Stewart here. It's time for some more Metal Monday. Today, it's going to be this album right here, Above the Sky by Majestica. In case you can't tell by the album cover, this is a power metal band. This is a Swedish power metal band you may not have heard of yet, but you should hear them now because they sound great. You may be a little bit familiar with the main character in this one, Tommy Johanson, who performs lead vocals, lead guitar, all the keyboards, and is the main creative force behind this band. Also plays in Sabaton, which is coming out with an album in a couple of weeks. And based on this album, which is really good, and I do recommend you check it out, I'm actually much more hyped for the new Sabaton because of the quality of this one. You may also be familiar with Tommy's earlier band, Reinxeed, spelled R-E-I-N-X-E-E-D, I believe. This is a different band to me, not just in terms of a better name like Majestica, which kind of rolls off the tongue a little bit better and looks a little bit better on page rather than this weird transposing of S and X. It's stylistically quite different as well. This is much closer to straight ahead power metal, classic power metal than Reinxeed was, and I actually like it quite a bit better than what Tommy has done in the past. I think this is probably the best thing I've heard him on. I really like this album. It's one of the best power metal albums I've heard in years. One of the things that I loved right away when I saw this album and got it out, it was a present for my sister for my birthday. I loved the cover. The cover right away reminds me of some of the Gamma Ray albums from the 1990s. This blue and yellow color palette, of course, the band's name in that blue and yellow, and of the pyramids with the light and the stars and the wizard. You know, this really reminds me of Somewhere Out in Space, Power Plant, at least in terms of the color palette, Insanity and Genius. Gamma Ray really likes that blue and yellow look, and I think it actually has a very striking and beautiful appearance. It's a great set of contrasting colors. Usually you would do blue and orange if you want the full contrast, but blue and yellow just looks great with this. So I really appreciate the album design. However, the similarities to Gamma Ray are not just the cover. It sounds like Gamma Ray in the best way that I could say it sounds like Gamma Ray. So it has that classic approach to power metal, very straightforward at the beginning of the album and then goes in many, many different directions, just like Gamma Ray will tend to do. In fact, this album begins in much the same way as Somewhere Out in Space does. It begins with a very fast bass solo and then proceeds to kind of kick your butt with a really high energy, positive power metal song called Above the Sky, which I believe there's a music video out for it now. You can check it out. One of the things that this band features that you can expect from a power metal band, it's fast, very, very catchy melodies, and of course, great vocals that sing very high. Tommy Johanson is an excellent vocalist on this album. His range spans normal tessitura all the way up to like high screeching screams, all of which sound really good. None of them sound harsh. None of them sound awkward or anything like that. He is really in top form with this one. The guitars, likewise, great lead guitar work, great bass work on the album. And actually, one more connection to Gamma Ray. The session drummer for this band, who's not pictured on the inner sleeve, by the way, because I think he was just playing drums on the album and wasn't a permanent member. This is Tommy Johanson and the other guys in the band. It's Uli Kusch, who was a drummer for Gamma Ray. He's drummed for Gamma Ray, I think, on their first 3 albums, leaving the band after Insanity and Genius, and or actually, I think leaving the band after Land of the Free. Now, I had heard that he actually had stopped being in the music business. He stopped playing music because he had some nerve issues with his hands and couldn't play. But it's really good to hear him back in action and hear him recording some great power metal. And he sounds in top form on this. He doesn't sound like he's lost a beat in the last 20 years. The drumming is great. It's exactly what this album needed to fill out their sound. Now, I mentioned a lot of straightforward power metal. That's where the album begins, but kind of like Gamma Ray, not just on the Somewhere Out in Space album, but in all of their albums, and especially the Majestic album, and this band is called Majestica. There's a huge amount of variety on this album. There's variety in terms of tempo, texture, approach, lyrical content. There's variety in terms of how serious the song is. It starts with some very serious songs like Rising Tide, Above the Sky. And then there's also some things that have a little bit more of a humorous element, like Night Call Girl, which is intended to be a little bit retro. It sounds like an 80s tune, but not really. It has this 80s keyboard sound, but it's thoroughly modern and quite progressive, as well as you have something like Futureland, which I think is a throwback to one of Tommy's earliest songs, like a re-recording of that, because he also includes the demo from like 2002. And you can see, this is quite ballsy, by the way, to include something that shows how bad you were, however long ago it is now, 17 years. Not that he sounds bad, but he's improved so much before this album. It's really, really awesome to hear like how far things have gone between one version of the composition and a new recording of the composition as well. But Father Time is quite a humorous take on the power metal genre, which Gamma Ray would tend to do as well. They tend to have some really serious songs, some that are high energy, super positive, and some that are just kind of silly. And I like the fact that the band doesn't take itself so seriously that it can't have some fun on the album as well. So let me go through my usual categories, and I'll give you a breakdown on how this album performs on all of them. Overall, it's a great album. Now, first category is usually production. And I need to say two things about the production. In fact, I might even give it 2 scores if I was going to give it scores. The album version, that is the vinyl version, and this is the black vinyl. You can get, I think there's a blue vinyl out on Nuclear Blast's store, but this one's black. It sounds really good. It's a good heavyweight vinyl. I think it's an 80-gram vinyl. The vinyl master is much better than the digital master. I know I said this basically last week, but this is really the case with Nuclear Blast records. My vinyl of Sons of Northern Darkness in particular sounds so much better than the digital version. I don't know, it's beyond belief sometimes. The reason I think is that Nuclear Blast, this part of their sound, they feature a very compressed and a very almost a brick-walled kind of sound. It's a loudness war sound, if you've heard me talk about that. So the digital version, the CD version, or the streaming version of Above the Sky features a fairly maximized sound, which means that it's the production is too thick in lots of different places. The keyboards are buried. You can't clearly hear the guitars. Things are noisy. When you hear the master on the vinyl, it's far superior to the digital version. You can clearly hear all the instruments. The stereo spread actually sounds better than it does on the digital version, which is not usually the case with vinyl, because there's a little bit of channel bleed that can happen with vinyl, but it sounds much wider. It has a brighter, warmer sound. The vocals sound better. Everything sounds like it's in a better balance, and I think that's because it's not featuring that brick-walled, ultra-compressed, ultra-maximized production. One of the problems that happens when you are making a digital album, and it's almost unavoidable, you know that people are going to listen to it on some sort of streaming service, streaming platform, or listen to it on YouTube. And if the perception of the volume is lower than the tracks around it, that's considered problematic. People also expect when they put their headphones into their phone that they're going to be able to hear it nice and loud. So I'll do a full video sometime on loudness wars and where I think it comes from. But suffice to say that the digital version is somewhat a victim of the loudness wars. It doesn't sound bad, but the vinyl sounds much better. So the production on the vinyl, I would give it a really solid like 9.5 out of 10. I don't think there's any production problems other than maybe a couple of balance issues here and there. But the digital version, 8 out of 10. It's good, but it's not nearly as good as the vinyl version in terms of being able to hear everything clearly and have it have a beautiful, warm, full, huge, big sounding production. The guitar tone, as is usually the case, sounds much better on the vinyl version. Next, let's talk about the performances. The performances are top notch. I would say the performances on this album are easily 9 out of 10. The only reason they might not hit 10 out of 10 is just the guitar solo sections are not quite as interesting compared to some other things in the genre. They're great in and of themselves. The guitar playing is very impressive. But when you play something that's very reminiscent of Gamma Ray, I'm going to start wanting to hear Kai and Hinyo playing. And Tommy's a great player. The other players in the band are great players as well. I'm trying to remember their names. I have them right here. Oh, Alex Ortiz, the other guitar player, also excellent. And Chris David plays bass. They're great musicians. there's nothing bad to say about them. It's just really hard to get like a perfect 10 out of 10 for me on performance. The vocal performance in particular is the standout here. Tommy sounds great. He's an amazing vocalist. I would love to continue to hear more of his take on power metal. He just sounds like he's a real natural fit for this style of thing. He sounds like a more classically trained Kai Hansen, if you want to say that. That ability to jump up and scream high notes and have him be highly dramatic, but at the same time, his tone is full and round. So in general, everything on this album, performance-wise, works great. And like I said, Uli Kush does a great job playing the drums on this. He's the perfect kind of drummer for this style of music. Lots of subtlety, lots of ability to play fast and keep that beat going. It's just great in general. Composition elements. So the compositions here are mostly really, really good. There's a couple of standout tracks. Of course, the first one, Above the Sky, I think is actually the best song on the album. Rising Tide is also good. My other favorites on here are probably Way to Redemption and Alliance Forever. And then maybe, Father Time. Father Time is a kind of a more silly track, but boy, it's a lot of fun, and there's a lot of interesting things going on with it. Likewise, Motley True has some real surprises with its length and the way that it's arranged. When you think the song is over, there's just a new section, which is something that Gamma Ray tends to do often as well. I also have some affection for Night Call Girl and its kind of retro feel with these retro keyboards. And throughout the album, I actually felt a profound sense of nostalgia, even though all this material is new, and it doesn't sound like a ripoff of anything I'm nostalgic for. I heard elements of Sonata Arctica, particularly their first two albums, with the choice of keyboard patches, as well as the vocal performance with that combination. It sounds like the energy on those first two Sonata Arctica albums, which are my favorite two Sonata Arctica albums, probably, including the first one's probably my favorite. So that energy sounds great. Sounds great transferred on there. There's even a patch that uses this FM synthesized trumpet on one of the tracks that sounds sounds like the exact same patch that was used on Vainglory Opera by Edguy. So I had a big kind of rush of nostalgia. But of course, the song itself is quite a bit different and better in lots of ways than the old Gamma Ray stuff. So I liked that I had this feeling of nostalgia listening to these songs, but it also felt new. I was surprised enough all the way through by the arrangements to like it. So overall, I really like the songs on it. I'd give the songs a 9 out of 10. Again, they're really good. I can't think of any song that there's no songs on here I skip. The only one that I think is not of the same quality is probably Futureland, which is an older song I think that he wrote, because there's a 2002 version. I think he wrote this a long time ago, and it just isn't up to the same compositional quality as the other songs on the album, but it's still kind of a fun little song to listen to. So that's probably the only tick that I would see. Otherwise, it's great. It's a great assortment of power metal songs, and anyone who's into power metal is sure to find some enjoyment in most of the tracks that are on here. So overall, great composition. General effect, I mentioned the nostalgia. General effect's probably a 9 out of 10. The only thing that I might say would stop it from being pretty close to perfect, I don't give out a lot of perfect scores. I don't say things are perfect. Is that there's perhaps maybe one or two too many songs. There's four sides on this. This is a 2 LP album. There's a lot of music to listen to, and so as a result, I think maybe if they cut 2 of the tracks, you would have had a little bit more leaner, tighter album. It's hard to write. How many songs are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's hard to have 10 songs and then these 2 bonus tracks and have them, every single one, be of the same high quality. It's usually, I think, better to focus on like 8. But that's not a big tick. They're really good. There's really good songs on here. I'd say if I were going to pick one that's probably the least favorite, it might be the Rat Pack. And that's it. But it's not a bad song. It's still a pretty good song. There's also a cover on here of Spaceballs, the song from the Spaceballs movie, and it's really funny and really good, and I like to have that more humorous element. So overall, general effect is great. I was really happy to hear a classic power metal song and still have it sound pretty fresh, and then to hear a whole album of power metal songs and have them sound really not like they're just a throwback to that 90s power metal Gamma Ray, Halloween, Sonata Arctica kind of sound, but really to sound like it still is its own thing while being reminiscent of that. That's quite a unique achievement. So overall, Majestica, it's the best album actually I've heard this year so far. There's still some great ones that are going to come out this summer. The new Abath is actually out when I'm recording this video, and I've listened to that one, and also I'll have a review of that one coming. There's new Tyrilli Leon Rhapsody in the power metal genres. There's going to be new Sabaton. There's new Twilight Force coming out. There's probably a whole bunch of other stuff I've already forgotten. At some point, there may be a new Dragon Force album this year, so I'm really excited about this year for metal, and so far it's shaping up to be pretty good across the genres. So check it out. Majestica, Above the Sky. It does earn my recommendation, and I hope you like it too. I'll see you guys next time.